Hello everyone, my name is Peter Ismert and I work at the Environmental Protection Agency in Denver, Colorado. Also joining me will be Maddy Castro from EPA as well. We both work in the Water Division and are in the Watershed Section at EPA. We are here to give an introduction about how wildfires can affect water quality in nearby rivers, streams, and lakes, and also how that affects our use of water for drinking water, recreational purposes, agriculture, and other uses. Although we will be talking in generalities, the information will also apply to situations from the recent fires in the Poudre River watershed. Wildfires are a natural part of many ecosystems, but recently fires have become more severe and widespread, as we saw here last year. They have increased in number, size, and intensity, causing excessive damage to ecosystems, not just in the Poudre watershed, but across many parts of the West. Researchers from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Department of Interior, EPA, state agencies, universities, and nonprofit organizations have been looking at less understood area of impacts from wildfires, the impacts on water quality. We plan to go over a few aspects to understanding how wildfires affect water quality. First, we will cover the basics of the water cycle. Then we will look at how wildfires affect the land and water quality. We will talk about the pollutants of concern associated with wildfires. We will cover how our uses of water can be affected by reduced water quality. And finally, we will touch on restoration opportunities to help improve water quality after a wildfire. Let's start with the water cycle with a simple illustration. Water is constantly moving on Earth. The water cycle consists of all the processes involved in the transfer and storage of water in Earth's atmosphere, on its surface, underground, and by organisms living here. Liquid water evaporates into water vapor, condenses to form clouds, and precipitates back to Earth in the form of rain and snow. Liquid water flows across the land's surface, this is called runoff, into the ground, which is infiltration and percolation, and through the ground, where it's considered groundwater. Subsurface water is taken up by plants and then evaporates from plants into the atmosphere. This is called transpiration. The portion of rainwater and snowmelt that flows off the soil surface is called overland flow, also called surface runoff. This is a major contributor of water to streams, rivers, and lakes. This process occurs when the rainfall intensity or the rate of snowmelt exceeds the ability of the soil to soak up water. Overland flow is normal and is the pathway that moves precipitation most directly to the stream channel, usually through small rills and gullies, and in doing so quickly produces stream flow. Water quality refers to the physical, chemical, and biological characteristics of water. Physical characteristics refer to things like the amount of sediment and temperature. It can also refer to the actual river, stream, or lake, like the condition of the bed, bank, or the shoreline. Chemical refers to chemical makeup of the water, such as both natural and human-made pollutants. Natural pollutants might be nitrogen and phosphorus. Human-made pollutants are a whole host of chemicals that are used in many aspects of our lives. Biological condition can refer to the amount of bacteria and viruses that might be in the water, particularly if the water is for people to drink or for recreation like swimming. It also refers to the natural biology of the river, such as the fish, insects, and plants. Now let me turn it over to Maddy Castro to talk a bit about wildfires.
Hello everyone, I'm Maddy Castro and I work with Peter in the Watershed Section at the EPA. Now that Peter has covered the basics of water, let's look more specifically at how wildfires might affect water quality and our uses of water. While the effects of a severe fire can be devastating, the effects of a low to moderate intensity fires can be rejuvenating to watershed health. Low to moderate intensity fires can encourage vegetation succession and promote diverse habitats. High-intensity fires can leave long-term severe damages to the forest ecosystem. An example of the recent large wildfires in the West is the Cameron Peak Fire, which quickly became the largest recorded wildfire in Colorado's history. It burned 208,913 acres of land and lasted for 4 months. While this fire did impact the vegetation in the area, it is important to note that there are several reservoirs within the boundary of the fire-burned area. These reservoirs store water for drinking and agriculture uses along the Front Range. The impacts are still being assessed, but we do know that the fires burned around many reservoirs and streams that flow in and out of these highly used water bodies. An initial report on the impacts of the fire indicates that the watershed response will likely include an initial flash of ash, rill and gully erosion in headwater drainages and on steep slopes, debris-filled flash floods after high-intensity rain events, increased snowmelt during peak flows, and potential debris flows. The quality of water will be reduced during seasonal peak runoff, as well as after heavy summer rains due to the elevated ash, fine sediment, and nutrient loading from wildfires. These concerns will slowly reduce over time as vegetation and ground cover levels recover over the next several years, although some impacts are likely to stay in the watershed for decades or longer.
On the ground surface, water generally just flows downhill, but what water does in its journey is where the problem lies. To understand how wildfires affect water quality, we need to first understand how they impact the movement of water. So with all this in mind, when conditions on the land have been affected by wildfires, the distribution of water changes or shifts out of balance. During a wildfire, vegetation that holds soil in place and retains water is burned away. Also, during active burning, ash and contaminants settle on the lands, streams, lakes, and reservoirs. The loss of protective vegetative cover and the excessive overland flow of rainwater will increase soil erosion rates. The percentage of surface cover from the litter layer and the canopy cover are important determinants of erosion. Less cover, greater the chance of accelerated erosion. The more severe the fire, the greater loss of this protective layer. Because a wildfire of high severity can destroy much of the vegetation and litter layer and alter the physical properties of the soil, the infiltration and percolation capacities of the soil are affected. There is a big increase in the amount of bare soils in a watershed that has seen a wildfire. With this poor watershed condition, the amount of rainfall that seeps into the ground to become groundwater is significantly reduced. More rainwater is then available to flow over the surface of the soil, and with the loss of the protective vegetative layer, much more soil will be transported to the streams than normal. Non-point source pollution is caused by rainfall or snowmelt moving over and through the ground. It comes from erosion, the main side effect from overland flow. As the runoff moves, it picks up and carries away natural and human-made pollutants, finally depositing them into lakes, rivers, wetlands, and groundwaters. In the aftermath of an intense wildfire, rainstorms flush large quantities of these non-point source pollutants into streams, rivers, and downstream reservoirs. Next, Maddy will talk about some of these pollutants.
Wildfires can compromise water quality both during active burning and for months and years after the fire has been contained. Forest fires create new pollutants and expose existing pollutants to the weathering process. Post-fire stream flow can transport solid and dissolved materials that adversely affect the quality of water for domestic, agriculture, or industrial purposes. Sediment, nutrients, heavy metals, salts, and other chemical pollutants are a concern after wildfires. As the rainfall flows overland towards the streams, it picks up soil and any other pollutants and carries them downstream. Soil itself is considered a pollutant once it reaches the stream in excess of the natural amount. The most visibly obvious water quality effects are produced by sediments. Although muddy streams are natural, an excessively muddy stream can cause problems to the water users downstream. Now let's dive into how chemical pollutants from wildfires affect water bodies. Nutrient pollution such as nitrogen and phosphorus is detrimental to water quality. Wildfires will often increase these pollutants in nearby rivers, streams, and lakes. Nitrogen released from plant tissue during and after a fire can leach as nitrate from burned areas. Normally, nitrogen is taken up by plants high up in the watershed, but after a wildfire, there are less plants available to perform this function. Instead of being taken up by plants, the nitrogen gets carried away downstream by runoff water and soil erosion after a wildfire. The sediment that ends up in streams often carries other pollutants, most notably phosphorus. Phosphorus and nitrogen are important nutrients. However, elevated levels in water bodies used for drinking water or recreational uses can be a concern for human health and wildlife health. The excess nutrients in the water bodies can overstimulate the growth of aquatic vegetation and algae, causing dense growth of plant life. When the vegetation becomes too dense, it can cause oxygen levels in the water to drop, resulting in the death of animal life. This process is also known as eutrophication. Fire retardants used to fight fires are usually made with some type of ammonia, nitrogen, and phosphorus mixture. Therefore, can be an additional source of nutrient pollution to aquatic systems if the retardant needs to be released into or near the surface of waters. Retardants that are released or flushed into water bodies can cause short-term increases in nutrient levels, which can also aid to the eutrophication process. Salts such as sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium may increase after wildfires. However, fortunately, these compounds may only last a year or so after the fire. Studies have shown that elevated levels of naturally occurring iron, lead, nickel, and zinc in streams are common downstream of a fire-damaged watershed. Heavy metal pollutants can often affect the health of wildlife and humans if the concentrations are high enough after prolonged exposure. The increased and erratic flows in fire-affected watersheds has a big impact on the structure of downstream waterways. The most obvious are changes in stream banks and stream beds. The prolonged higher than normal flows easily cut away the stream banks, over-widening the stream and causing further unwanted erosion. The stream beds will also erode faster, lowering the water levels. The soil that is now suspended in the streams will eventually drop out, creating larger deposition areas, further widening the stream at those locations. These changes in the physical structure of the stream has impacts to accessing and using water for agriculture purposes, such as irrigation, diversions, pumps, and other facilities that need to access the stream and rivers. Riparian areas, the lush areas adjacent to the streams and rivers that typically contain wild grasses, vegetation, and wildlife, are pollutant filters to maintaining water quality. Losses of these habitats due to lowering of the stream or excess bank erosion will result in less riparian areas to capture and filter pollutants from groundwater and overland flow. Loss of riparian plants will also decrease the forage available for wildlife and cattle to graze on within these riparian areas.
So how do wildfires affect the water we use daily? We will go over how the impacts of wildfires affect our many uses of water, primarily due to decreased water quality. Since we learned that there will be less rainwater becoming groundwater, there will be less groundwater feeding the streams during the dry times of the year. This is a key component of the water cycle. In dry parts of the country, the groundwater is an important type to help maintain a healthy stream and to be available for water uses throughout the year. Agriculture, recreation, and household use all rely in part on groundwater, either by directly pumping it from the ground or by using it after it gets released to the streams and lakes later in the year. Forest fires result in an increase in chemicals and contaminants that we discussed earlier. When rains come, contaminants from ash and debris can be mobilized by the rainfall runoff and the associated wind. These contaminants have the potential to seriously affect the water quality uses such as drinking water, agriculture, recreation, and maintaining sensitive habitat areas or ecosystems. Downstream, higher amounts of erosion from the burn areas can increase the amount of sediment entering downstream reservoirs, impacting all these uses to some degree. Drinking water treatment plants will have a harder time cleaning the water if it has excessive sediment and ash. Increased cloudiness caused by suspended sediment material, this is called turbidity, or increased iron and manganese concentrations may increase chemical treatment requirements and produce larger volumes of sludge during the treatment process, both of which would raise operating costs. Due to the unpredictable nature of wildfires, drinking water utilities face a considerable challenge to develop plans and strategies for managing the effects of post-wildfire floods and treating polluted water. Future treatment costs will be an ongoing concern as wildfire frequency and severity seem to both be increasing. Under the Clean Water Act, most states identify agricultural use of water as one of its protected uses with its own water quality standards. Of course, wildfires are highly destructive and can damage crops and soil, harm livestock, and create a high-risk environment for agricultural workers. In addition to the physical dangers of an active fire, wildfire smoke, ash, and chemicals used to treat fires negatively affect air and water quality. Pollutants released by wildfires can affect crop and vegetation growth miles from the fire impact zone. Too often, water quality is not suitable for agricultural uses. High salt concentrations that often result from wildfires limit the amount of water a plant can take up, resulting in high plant stress and decreased crop yields. High concentrations of metals that are from wildfire burn areas also have negative effects on crop production. Nutrient pollutants, particularly nitrogen, significantly affect the ecosystem long after a large-scale wildfire. Excess nitrogen in the water increases algae growth, which then affects dissolved oxygen when the algae decays. This presents a host of problems for the stream and lake ecosystems. Low oxygen leads to fish kills. The algae will sometimes form harmful algal blooms, which can produce toxins to birds, mammals, and people. Erosion from upland landscapes and burned riparian areas can also increase turbidity in the water and reduce the quality of aquatic habitat. While the increase in turbidity from the sediment tends to limit algae growth initially, eventually the increase in nutrients will take over and contribute to the algal blooms. Lastly, the deposition of ash into water bodies, either from air or erosion, can also affect fish by limiting visibility or clogging gills. These are just a few of the effects from wildfires on ecosystems that we have time to mention right now, but many other impacts exist that affect the ecology of our streams and lakes. Physical, chemical, and biological characteristics are all important to the recreational uses of water. For example, intact stream banks provide an aesthetic place to enjoy and recreate on lakes and rivers. Excessive erosion that we've been discussing can significantly impact people's recreational experiences on rivers and lakes. Pollutants can affect our health and safety as we enjoy recreational opportunities such as swimming, wading, and water skiing. The biological component of water quality leads to the quality of recreation, such as the importance of a healthy fish population for people who go fishing. A healthy ecosystem is needed to support a viable fishery for recreation.
You all just listened to a lot of negative side effects that come from wildfires, but it's important to remember that wildfires are a natural process in many ecosystems. Areas like forests and grasslands depend on recurring wildfires to allow space for new vegetation to grow, help break down organic matter for plants to access these nutrients. There are even cases where pine cones will release their seedlings only after they've come in contact with fire. So wildfires aren't going anywhere anytime soon, but we can still help the forest with post-fire restoration. Here we'll be touching on a few things that can be done to help restore wildfire-affected areas, which include riparian damage from fighting the fire, emergency stabilization of hill slopes and streams, and long-term recovery practices. Re-establishing vegetation in burned areas is the primary way to minimize water quality effects from a fire. Often, Mother Nature will quickly regrow grasslands and forests to help slow runoff and erosion. However, certain wildfire areas may not be restored that easily or quickly. If they are high-value areas or priority for restoration to improve water quality, people will need to help the ecosystem to jumpstart the restoration process. There are a lot of techniques that can be put into place to reduce erosion from burned areas. Streams and rivers that were physically affected from excess erosion can be restored, but tend to be costly because you typically will be bringing in machinery or labor to add or remove levees, soil, and vegetation. Nevertheless, by reconnecting a degraded stream channel back to its floodplain, a stream restoration project can also improve water quality and the health of riparian vegetation, something that benefits livestock grazing and native plants and animals. Whatever people can do to restore the fire-affected areas within their limited budgets, the quicker the downstream water quality will begin to return to normal. Low to medium severity wildfires on grasslands are a natural process that help rejuvenate the soil. This occurs either naturally or in a controlled situation. Short-term impacts to water quality from these fires may occur, but can be managed by maintaining healthy stream systems. The more intact a system is and other agricultural water sources are, the better they are prepared to withstand the effects of high-severity wildfires in upstream forests or on grazing lands. Good riparian area management on agricultural lands will help with future impacts to water quality. The plants along the bank of the river and nearby floodplains will help hold the soil in place if wildfire-induced floods were to come. This is especially important for grazing lands in mountain valleys and downstream plain areas. Also, intact riparian areas will help filter pollutants and slow the spread of eroded sediment from upstream wildfires. Good land management will help maintain healthy forests and rangelands to reduce the potential for severe wildfires. And this will of course keep the fires away, improving chances of not being affected by wildfires. But in general, landowners near or downstream from potential wildfire areas should manage their land to maximize resilience to wildfires and the water quality effects.
As we just mentioned, non-point source pollution from wildfires is widespread and costly to control. Forming partnerships and leveraging funding with other interested stakeholders is a top priority to restoring lands affected by wildfires. This is just a sampling of possible partners to come together to help begin the restoration process. So, in summary of what we talked about, severe wildfires can disrupt water quality and our uses of water in many ways. Wildfires are complicated and will often affect the land in a way that will affect water quality. Fortunately, we can take proactive steps to minimize the effects of wildfires. When fires do occur, people can take action to help restore important areas of land and water bodies to more stable conditions.
Thank you everyone for listening in and being interested in understanding how wildfires affect water quality and our uses of water. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact either Peter Ismert or myself, Maddy Castro. Our email addresses can be found on the slide here. Thanks again.